All right. Well, I have a few things to say pertaining to this World War III threat, but I thought I wanted to start with something a little bit different so everyone doesn't have a nervous breakdown, which is two little short videos which give you a sense of why the British are so desperate to launch this war, because you have such a different outlook coming from China and Russia. And we had a milestone this week, which is the second video. People may know the 7 billionth person is now alive on the planet, and there were a number of different, celebrations in different countries. They designated a number of babies to be the 7 billionth people. But Putin was very happy to welcome in the 7th billion baby in Russia. But what I want to look at first is what the Chinese just did, which is phenomenally exciting because they managed to successfully dock this space station on the one that they had launched earlier. And this is extremely complex. The United States first accomplished this sort of thing back in 1966. I'm sure we could not do it now. We have so dismantled our technological base, our space program. So it's a very big deal. It's really fun to watch, and you see the excitement of the scientists, because they're all sitting there at the control panels watching this thing once they successfully hook up. So we're going to look at that first. What do you want me to do? Oh.
This is the moment China's dreams of becoming the third great space power took an astronomical leap forward. A specially modified Shenzhou 8 module managed to dock with the Tiangong-1 or Heavenly Palace space station testbed. It may not seem like much, but mastering the art of docking in orbit is one of the most complicated and important steps towards building and manning a future space station. Joining two objects travelling through zero gravity at thousands of miles an hour, hundreds of miles away, is, to put it mildly, a challenge. The US and USSR managed it decades ago, but this is almost wholly a Chinese effort, so they've had to start from scratch and learn the tricks and technology for themselves. The Shenzhou 8 module that was sent up this time is unmanned, but could comfortably seat several crew members in future. The pair will separate and rejoin several times in the coming months. Then China says it will begin construction of a dedicated space lab, then a full space station, to be completed by 2020.
Isn't that great? All right, now, this is really fun. This is Putin.
Hello, Yelena. My congratulations to you, your baby, and your family. Here is a gift for you, a certificate for a new apartment, where you will be happy. Thank you. At a maternity center in Kaliningrad, Prime Minister Vladimir Putin congratulated the mother of a newborn boy, who is one of several being designated as the 7th billion inhabitant of the planet. He is beautiful. Don't be afraid, you are wearing a sterile robe, so you can hold him. I'm a bit afraid, but thank you. It's Piotr, right? Piotr Alexeyevich. Baby Piotr is the third child for the Nikolaevs. How did you manage to hit 7 billion? I think it wasn't me. He did it. It's his fortune. I'm just an ordinary mum, but the baby is special. He is the 7th billion baby, yes. Piotr was born in Kaliningrad in the early morning of October the 31st. He is not the only contender for the title of the 7th billion human. Other babies waiting for a UN decision were born in India and the Philippines.
I never see Putin smile so much.
I know. So you think of the Brits, and LaRouche was speaking today, and he said, people have a weird standard of insanity. Isn't it insane to say that we have 7 billion people and the Queen thinks we should have 1 billion. So we're going to get rid of 6 billion. I mean, that's insane. That's insanity. And he said, who would be crazy enough to listen to that little Queen in the first place?
I bet she's not volunteering herself.
Yeah, she hasn't so far, and she's pretty old also. Now, what I wanted to look at, LaRouche also is working on finishing a paper, which is up it's a fragment that's up on the website, and I think it's just about done now. It's called Dumb Democrats, Principle or Party. And it really is very important, because when we're organizing the population, this is what you're dealing with in the population, is that everybody has their, they think according to pre-accepted labels, which have nothing to do with reality. And underneath it, most people also know that, frankly, everybody is fed up with both parties. I mean, you meet people in the field now and no one wants to say what party that they're in. They'd say, well, I was a whatever, Democrat or Republican. I was, but now I don't know, I'm sort of independent. Because the rot is just unbelievable. But what I wanted to look at is this World War threat, because this is for real, and it is, if you're not on edge, then you're not in the real world. And we are careening toward World War III at a really alarming rate, much faster than you would imagine. And I wanted to get at some of the delusion of this. I was trying to learn more I was giving myself a crash course on what happened in World War I. So I asked my husband, who has all kinds of books, what he had, and he gave me this one called The First World War by A.J.P. Taylor. And after I read a teeny bit of it, I felt like throwing it out the window, because here is the premise. Men are reluctant to believe that great events have small causes. Therefore, once the Great War started, they were convinced that it must be the outcome of profound forces. It is hard to discover these when we examine the details. Nowhere was there conscious determination to provoke a war. Statesmen miscalculated. They used the instruments of bluff and threat which had proved effective on previous occasions, and this time things went wrong. The deterrent on which they relied failed to deter, and the statesmen became prisoners of their own weapons. The great armies accumulated to provide security and preserve the peace carried the nations to war by their own weight. So somehow these great armies, which had just coincidentally happened to mass themselves all over the place, the armies just caused the war to break out, even though no one really wanted the war to occur, and it was just a series of little accidental missteps. Unbelievable. And this is the same argument of those people who say that earthquakes are not predictable. Right? The quakes, the 9 quake that hit Japan, and I forget how many times, 30 times or 13 times or whatever, how many times the magnitude of the 2 nuclear bombs that were dropped on Japan. Okay, this is a massive, massive amount of energy. And as the Russian scientist Pulinet said, do you really suppose that such a massive amount of energy just instantaneously assembles itself and erupts with no preparation, with no indications that this thing is building up into the explosion that results in that kind of an earthquake? He said that's absurd. How could it be that you unleash that amount of energy and absolutely nothing happens before the fact? It makes no sense. And of course, what people know from the work that we've shown here, the research that we've found is, in fact, there are many, many precursors. That there was a compression of the ionosphere right over the epicenter of the Haiti quake for months before the Haiti quake. Now, we didn't know enough at the time to know that what that could be an indication of, But if we were to actually do the research, not do what Obama's doing and taking down all of our satellites and all of the way of measuring this, then we could probably very rapidly put together enough evidence of different types of precursors that you could quite accurately predict when and where and what magnitude an earthquake was going to be. And you could have days or even weeks or months notice before the earthquake hit. Now, would that be valuable?
Yeah.
Would it be valuable to the people in San Francisco to know a week ahead of time if there was going to be a major earthquake? Right? But so what they say is just like this guy, oh no, oh, it's just a coincidence. No one could ever know. There's no indication that, you know, the magnitude of 20 nuclear bombs is going to go off in one place. It just happens arbitrarily, and there's no way you can know it. And that is a very specific anti-human outlook. All right, now I want the map. So what I want to look at is how we're going into this World War III, as Taylor would say, it's all just totally accidental. No one really intends it. And as everyone knows, a few weeks ago, we had Obama using drones to assassinate 3 U.S. citizens in Yemen. The father of one of them tried to sue to find out what exactly is the evidence that his son is an Al-Qaeda terrorist, and was told that it was a secret and he couldn't find out. So his son and a friend were killed, and then his son's 16-year-old son was killed by a drone while out at a barbecue in Yemen. And we have a president who says that he has the right to have lists of people who can be assassinated, and the evidence will be secret, and the trial will be secret, and no one has to know. So you might ask, what prevents him from saying that I'm a terrorist? And if he did, what's the defense, since it's all secret? And we're not far from that, because what you have with the kind of vicious austerity, look at Greece, right? How much can the population take of crushing them, of getting rid of Medicare, of getting rid of Social Security, of eliminating jobs, eliminating basic infrastructure, food shortages? You're going to need a dictatorship. You're going to need terror to force the population into control. In Greece, what was being contemplated, and I'm not sure if it was done or not, was to bring in a force, of a multinational force, to crush the population, to stop them from protesting these kind of cuts. So we have now a president who says that he can have secret lists of people who will be assassinated at will, and we don't have to know why. Then you had Gaddafi. Okay, so you're looking at, and the assassinations were in Yemen. Whoops. Here. Gaddafi's over here, Libya. And he's in captivity. But he's shot in the head and killed. Now, normally that constitutes a war crime. And you heard LaRouche's point that had Gaddafi been brought to trial over various things, one, I think they're very afraid about what kind of things might have come out about who did the, Lockerbie, Pan Am bombing and various things. They were afraid of that. But also it would have delayed what they actually intend to do, which is this larger war. And I wanted to put this map up because I want you to have an idea of where these things are. So you heard Alicia, they're talking about 40,000 troops in Syria, supposedly to protect civilians. We're moving 2/3 of our Navy into the Indian Ocean, and another third into the Mediterranean. Okay, and then it has now been announced that Netanyahu and the Israeli Defense Minister Ehud Barak have concluded that they really do need to launch a preemptive strike on Iran. And they have been in London meeting with the British Defense minister and others to discuss this. Also, people should know that Tony Blair was here appropriately enough on Halloween to meet with Obama. Tony Blair was Mr. Weapons of Mass Destruction to help get the US into the Iraq War. And that is the British game. You remember Afghanistan, they get the opium going like crazy in Helmand province and they pull out and hand it over to the United States, right? Oh, you really have to start this war. We'll be right there behind you. We'll send 12 troops, but you start this war, right? So Tony Blair was here. The Israeli defense minister is in London. And the other aspect of this, why are we saying nuclear, is because if they're targeting Iran's nuclear power plant, the Bushehr plant, which was built in large part, designed by the Russians with Russian assistance, the thing is extremely well fortified. You cannot just bomb it. It is totally sturdy. The only way you could destroy that is to use a nuclear missile. So that if Israel launches the war, it will be a nuclear war from the beginning, because the only way that they could strike Iran is by using a nuclear missile, a Jericho missile they just tested, which has the range to strike Iran. So we're not saying a war that escalates to a nuclear war. It would start as a nuclear war. And of course, Israel would not do this without Obama's authorization, because that's how it works. Now, you do have a gigantic fight within Israel. The secretary for the Israeli Defense Forces said this is insane. We shouldn't do it. We don't want to be a suicide bomber. He opposes it. A woman who's a former officer of the Mossad and who's the head of a party in the Israeli Knesset has come forward saying this is nuts. It should be stopped. We shouldn't do it. So you have a gigantic fight within Israel of saner heads, and as in most cases, people with combat experience who have been in the military are usually not the ones the most eager to start a war, because they know what's involved in it, right? So you have enormous opposition, as you do have certain opposition in the United States, but the concern that I have, which we see over and over again, is that people are not in real time. They think we have time. We can wait. We can play our little footsie game with Obama and wait until the elections and forget it. We are really on a we're moving all these troops right now. We're doing this now. We killed Gaddafi weeks ago. This thing is underway now. This is not a plan for after January 2013. So I wanted to review how some of this, what people might remember in terms of the stench of this corruption and pragmatic thinking that we're dealing with in both parties and in the Congress. And I wanted to go back to 2007. And some of you might remember that in July of 2007, LaRouche delivered a quite extraordinary webcast where he said the financial system is finished. And he said there is nothing that you can do to save it. And 3 days later, what are known as the monoline insurers went bankrupt because they were underwriting things like these mortgage-backed securities and so on. By August, LaRouche had written something called the Homeowners and Bank Protection Act. Many people here worked on this. And in fact, we got the New York State Assembly to pass it, which was, in a sense, it was like a precursor to Glass-Steagall, where you said you're going to freeze all foreclosures on owner-occupied homes. No foreclosures. You're going to have a mechanism whereby these mortgages are restructured, and the payments of the mortgages don't go to Countrywide. They don't go to fake entities that were set up to rip people off. They go into the chartered savings and loan bank. So what you're doing is you're keeping people in their homes. You're having the mortgage payments that people are able to make to go into your transparent commercial banking system. And in a few years, Once you get the economy going again, you get people back to work, then you can look at these things, reevaluate the mortgage, and people can pay their new mortgage. Well, this thing, we got enormous support. We got a whole bunch of, Rhode Island, I think both houses of their state legislature endorsed this unanimously. We had hundreds of city councils. We had big cities like Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Detroit, Newark, New Jersey, all endorsing it. And Conyers was going to read it into the congressional record. And what happened? Barney Frank sabotaged it. Make sure it doesn't happen. We don't really, and what was the line? And then the line that was put out that we got in places like Pennsylvania, where we had 52 members of the state assembly who were co-sponsoring a bill to pass in Pennsylvania. And what happened? The head of the little local bankers association said, oh, no, we don't need to do this. What was Barney Frank's line? Barney Frank's line was that it would be unconstitutional to prevent someone from being foreclosed upon. This idea of the general welfare, forget that. That's not in the Constitution, right? So because of, criminality on the one hand, with Barney Frank, you're looking at criminality, and just pragmatism. On the other hand, this was not done. And what was the result? Well, guess what? It got worse. And in fact, as LaRouche said, not only did it get worse, not only did we have, I think, 4 million people actually thrown out of their homes and about 9 million other foreclosure proceedings, in the works, but you had the 2008 crash of the markets, which is exactly what LaRouche said. He said it's not a mortgage crisis, it's a systemic blowout of the whole entire system. And people didn't listen. Well, now what do you have? Well, everyone knows we got enormous traction on Glass-Steagall. We have the entire International Machinists Union, and we got the AFL-CIO to write a letter, and we have 52 or 53 now congressmen who are co-sponsoring the bill. And then all of a sudden, it's stopped. We've been told several times, most recently 2 weeks ago, that McCain and Cantwell, or some combination of senators, were going to introduce a companion bill in the Senate. Doesn't happen. Then the labor unions, who were at the top really prepared to push this thing, all of a sudden they're having a big day of action on what? A Tobin tax. A 1% tax on financial speculation. Talk about closing the door after the horses have left the barn. I mean, forget it. Why are they doing this? Because the orders have come down that they have to support Obama. And it's the leadership, it's not the rank and file, because everyone who's been out organizing can tell you nobody with half a brain wants Obama re-elected. They're just disturbed because there aren't really choices on the Republican side either. We don't have anyone running right now who's qualified to be president. So that makes people nervous. Happily, everything's going to, or unhappily, everything's going to blow up long before the election. So that's not really the first thing that we should be concerned about. And so what LaRouche said about this is that why are people doing this? Why are they going along with Obama? Why are they kissing his rear end? He said most Americans, you take all Americans in the whole country, almost every single person over the age of 18 is more competent than Obama. So why do people feel the need to go along with him? And he said because people have a small sense of identity, that they don't think of themselves as part of society and taking responsibility for the society, but rather they're somehow outside of it. And you're always looking to someone else. And you get that. I found it very funny because you get that in the street organizing where people say, well, I can't do anything, I'm just a person. Well, like, who in history was not a person? I mean, is there, and if you thought you were more than one person, maybe that would be a little bit dangerous too, right? So but this funny mindset, well, I'm just a person, right? And you get that with the congressman. I mean, we've literally had, and some people have been there, well, I can't do anything, I'm just a congressman. Yeah, I mean, you know, they have this smallness of identity. And I was reflecting on Kennedy. I don't know how many people here have read his book, Profiles in Courage, which he wrote before he was president. And it's about a whole series of senators, many of whom were totally destroyed. They lost their career, they lost their reputation, because they staked everything on a principle. And they said, whatever it is, and I read it long ago, I don't remember any of the particular fights, but it was very striking because they had the courage, each of these senators, to say, I don't care what happens to me, I care about what happens to the nation and what happens to mankind if I don't stand up on this issue. And many of them were just totally ripped to shreds, their families, I mean, just rotten. So you think about Kennedy and his attitude on the economy, on the space program, on the Vietnam War. In other words, he was not going to back down because of a threat of that. He already had studied that, so they had to kill him. But that is the quality of leadership that's required. You think of the people like Abraham Lincoln or FDR, who they tried to kill before he got in, and then you had that coup that Smedley Butler prevented, right? It's a different thinking where your identity is that you are part of society and you're responsible for society as a whole. And this is what Lynn did. I was thinking about this again, because people know we spent 8 years opposing Cheney. We put out this whole series of things on this rule by terror, using lies to bombard the population, the Congress of Cultural Freedom, you know, the destruction of the culture. We fought and fought. And and then when Bush and Cheney were finally out, many people around the country felt somewhat relieved. And then you discover that Obama is a disaster, but a lot of people really, really, really were desperate to deny it. And you think how early LaRouche was. It was April 11th, 2009. Obama had been in office for like 3 months. And he says the guy is a failed personality and he is a Nero. And what happened? I can tell you that everybody that we used to talk to in the Congress, we put that mustache on Obama, cut off contact. The people that were in touch with LaRouche during the years when we were going after Cheney and Bush, as soon as we said Obama was a failed personality and Nero, cut off contact. All of the people in the Congress we used to meet with, and both parties, said, no, we're not talking to you. Too extreme. And they wouldn't talk to us for months, for like a year and a half, because of what we said. And I don't think they even knew how bad Nero was, which I wanted to also share with you, because I'm not an expert on Nero, but I learned a little bit more. And it is really creepy, and it really is a pathology, and it's really worth getting a sense of it. And it wasn't just himself, it was his whole family. Nero's mother was in line from, I forget, Caesar Augustus or something or other. But she was a woman, so she wasn't the emperor. Her uncle was the emperor, and she had this baby Nero, and I guess his biological father died at some point, although they say that Nero's father was the type of person that once ran over a child with a cart and killed the child just for sport, just to get just for kicks. So that was Nero's father. Anyway, Agrippina decided to marry the uncle who was the emperor because she wanted her son Nero to become the emperor, and she wanted to control Rome through her son. Now the uncle already had a son of his own who was directly in line to be the emperor. But she slides in there, seduces the guy, gets him to marry her, and when there's an indication that maybe he's not going to go ahead and have Nero be his successor, she has him poisoned. So he's out of the way. Nero becomes emperor at the age of 17. And then Agrippina really wants to run the show, and so at a certain point she orchestrates this great feast and dresses in a really seductive fashion and seduces Nero, because that way she can control her son through sex. And Nero does his mother's beck and call for a certain point, but everyone knows there's that youthful rebellion where people don't want to be their mother's sex slave anymore. And so what happens is Nero invites his mother to this romantic retreat out on an island, and what he does is he has the boat prepared so that the boat will fall apart, so they go out and have their little thing on the island, and he says, I'm going to go home another way. I've, prepared this wonderful ship for you. Why don't you take the boat? And the boat is designed so it's going to fall apart when it gets in the ocean, which it does. But like many people who are very evil and ambitious, his mother is a fantastic swimmer. So she gets to shore. So then Nero has to hire assassins and have her killed that way, which he does. And it is the case that I'm not sure if he burned down Rome for poetic inspiration, as it says in this movie I recently watched. But at any rate, he does order Rome to be burned down. He's blaming it on the Christians. And his treatment of the Christians is not just feeding them to lions and things like that, but he actually has put outside of his windows all kinds of posts where people are burned at the stake all throughout the night, so that he can see by the light of the flames of the people he's burning to death in the evening. Okay, yeah, and the screams. So when LaRouche says Obama is Nero, all right, it is a very specific mindset. And it's not a stretch. Matt Ogden reported that apparently Obama, I guess they filmed, maybe it was drones, I'm not sure who was filming when the Navy SEALs killed Osama bin Laden, but there's apparently a video of this. And Obama watches this over and over and over again, like a snuff film. And apparently, yeah, it is a snuff film. And he loves the drones. He loves the drones because he said you can just come in. I'm sure he watches the drones blowing people up for kicks. They're very efficient. You can get a good picture of a person and just, blow their brains out. So what is that? This is a guy who is a Nero, who is criminally mentally ill, and he is the president of the United States of America. And that's why LaRouche is saying that it's not sufficient to just say that Obama has to be removed under Section 4 of the 25th Amendment, which is obviously appropriate because he obviously is insane, but that also you have to go for impeachment. He said you should do both things simultaneously because the guy has committed impeachable offenses and he's insane. And the only way you're going to stop him is to do something in that way, totally egregious. Now, the question is, how do we get Americans to think big, to stop thinking of themselves as some little peon, some little subject in Rome who all you can do is go to the Colosseum and watch the carnage and go along with it? How do we get Americans to actually take responsibility for society? And that's the challenge. And I think it is really worth studying people in history who thought that way, who conduct themselves that way. Obviously, LaRouche is such a person. I mean, you've seen him over the years. He doesn't care if he loses every last person supporting him if he has to say something which is true. And frankly, what I think happens is the universe is ordered so that the truth resonates. I mean, people may be committed to evil, but people also have an innate sense of what's right and what's wrong, of what's just and what's not, which is why after 89 years, LaRouche is still here, having conducted his life in such a way. And I have to say, I know he was like that from very young, because when we lived in New Hampshire, and I campaigned for in New Hampshire for LaRouche, once I had a little literature table, I met a woman whose name was something LaPierre, or it was right next to LaRouche in the alphabet, and she told me that she had gone to school with him. And she said he was a total pain in the ass. That he would like take over every class, he would correct the teachers, he was just as obnoxious as could be. And I do believe it, because he said that when he was 3 years old, one of the decisive moments in his life was when he heard his parents telling someone how wonderful, how nice, they were saying goodbye to company, and they said, oh, how lovely it was, we have to do this again soon, and then they shut the door and they said to each other, oh, I hate that lady, blah, blah, blah. And he said at 3, he figured out his parents were liars. So, you know, it's a very unusual course of development. But he brought up in the discussion of a couple days ago, he brought up Rosa Luxemburg, who we've talked about here, who was a revolutionary Polish Jew who had enormous insight on physical economy and physical principles. She wrote this paper, The Mass Strike, which made very clear that a mass strike is not like a labor strike. It's not controlled by a particular thing. It's like what you saw with the falling of the Berlin Wall, you know, where people are acting for mankind. They're not acting for their own personal interest, and that's why you can't control it. And LaRouche said, look, who is this woman? She has all these strikes against her. She was somehow misshapen, like her spine was twisted. She had this horrible limp. She was very frail and tiny, and she was Jewish, and she was poor. And but she apparently, every time she spoke, was totally commanding. She had an incredibly strong voice, an incredibly great singing voice. And what gave her her power is that she thought and acted from the standpoint of big principles. And now I just wanted to compare, because I found a paper. She actually wrote a whole paper opposing World War I. And she was in prison at the time, and it's very interesting, and it's totally different than what this guy says about World War I. So she writes, and then came the unheard of, the unprecedented, the 4th of August, 1914. Did it have to come? An event of this scope is certainly no game of chance. It must have been deep and wide-reaching objective causes. These causes can, however, also lie in the errors of the leader of the proletariat, the Social Democrats, in the waning of our fighting spirit, our courage and loyalty to our convictions. Scientific socialism has taught us to comprehend the objective laws of historical development. Men do not make history according to their own free will, but they make history nonetheless. So, totally different. She's saying there are causes, there were decisions, there was an intent to create this war. Okay, and that's her thinking. So, what Lynn has said, and what I just wanted to say in conclusion, and I think we can take some discussion on this, is that in this battle, where we are sitting on the fuse of World War III, and we really are there, that we have to conduct ourselves, obviously, with the intent to win, but that victory is not guaranteed, and that we want to act in such a way that if we lose now, that what we leave for future generations to work with to figure out what happened becomes the ability for them to rebuild out of a dark age, which is where we're definitely going to be if we don't succeed. And obviously, my intention is we don't have a dark age, as I hope everyone's intent here is, that we should win this fight now. However, we have to conduct ourselves in such a way that no matter when we succeed, it's a victory that is based on the most profound universal principles. So either we win it now or we win it generations from now. But I think everyone here should conduct themselves, as LaRouche said, he put aside all long-term plans, that we have to do everything we can right now to force this issue of Obama's removal and the passage of Glass-Steagall, which comes with that. But there is no way, it's very, very clear right now that there is no way we are going to get Glass-Steagall without Obama being forced out of office. It's totally clear. So that's what I had.